The mahogany conference table gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as Marcus Whitmore gripped its edge, his knuckles white against the polished wood. 23 faces stared at him from around the table: board members, investors, advisors, all waiting for his response to the quarterly disaster that had just been presented. His tech empire, built over 15 grueling years, was hemorrhaging money faster than water through a broken dam. Marcus, the voice belonged to Patricia Henley, his chief financial officer. Her tone carried that careful neutrality people used when they smelled blood in the water. The shareholders are demanding answers. Marcus felt his chest tighten, a familiar sensation that had been growing stronger over the past months. The sleepless nights, the endless pressure, the constant battle to stay ahead of younger, hungrier competitors, it was all catching up to him. At 52, he had sacrificed everything for success: his marriage, his relationship with his daughter Alina, his health, even his basic humanity. The Q3 numbers are ... began, but the words felt thick in his throat. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and he blinked hard, trying to focus. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the aggressive air conditioning. The numbers are challenging. But we have strategies in place too. The pain hit him like a freight train. Sharp, crushing pressure spread across his chest and down his left arm. The mahogany table rushed up to meet him as his knees buckled. Somewhere in the distance, he heard Patricia shouting for someone to call 911. Heard the scraping of chairs as 23 people suddenly forgot about quarterly losses and faced something far more immediate as Marcus lay on the cold conference room floor, his vision blurring at the edges. He saw his life with startling clarity. The corner office, with its panoramic city view, the penthouse apartment he barely lived in, the luxury cars he never had time to enjoy, none of it mattered now. He had built an empire of glass and steel, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten to build a life. The paramedics arrived in a blur of urgent voices and medical equipment. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, Marcus caught a glimpse of the boardroom he was leaving behind. The faces around that table showed concern. Yes, but it was the clinical concern of people worried about their investments, not their friend. Because that's what he had become: a stock ticker, a profit margin, quarterly report in human form. The ambulance ride to St. Mary's Hospital passed in a haze of sirens and medical jargon. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind wandering to Alina, his 25-year-old daughter who hadn't spoken to him in over 2 years. Their last conversation had been a screaming match about his priorities, about how he cared more about his company than his own family. She had been right, of course. But admitting that would have required a vulnerability he had trained himself never to show. At the hospital, doctors stabilized him quickly. The heart attack hadn't been massive, Dr. Rebecca Torres explained as she reviewed his chart, but it was his body's way of demanding attention he had refused to give it. Stress, exhaustion, poor diet, no exercise. He was a textbook case of executive burnout, taken to its logical extreme now. Lying in the sterile hospital room with machines monitoring his every heartbeat, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: complete powerlessness. His phone had been taken away, his laptop was back at the office. And for the first time in years, he couldn't control anything. The empire he had built was continuing without him, probably better without him, and the realization was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Outside his window, the city sparkled in the evening light, the same city where his company headquarters reached toward. The sky like a monument to his ambition. But from this hospital bed, it all seemed very far away. The silent observer, Rosa Martinez, pushed her cleaning cart down the dimly lit corridor of St. Mary's Hospital's cardiac wing, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished linoleum. It was just past midnight, the time when the hospital settled into its quieter rhythm, when the day-shift chaos gave way to the gentle hum of machines and the occasional murmur of night nurses making their rounds. At 63, Rosa had been cleaning these floors for nearly 2 decades. She had arrived from El Salvador with nothing but determination and a fierce work ethic, slowly building a life for herself and sending money back to her grandchildren. The night shift suited her. Fewer people meant fewer complications. She had always been more comfortable in the shadows than in the spotlight. She paused outside, room 314, where the new patient had been placed 3 days ago. Through the partially open door, she could see him lying motionless in the bed, staring at the ceiling with the hollow expression she had seen too many times before. The chart at the foot of his bed read Marcus Whitmore, a name she didn't recognize, though the expensive suit hanging in his closet, in the stream of well-dressed visitors during visiting hours, suggested he was someone important. But Rosa had learned long ago that importance meant little when you were flat on your back in a hospital bed. She had seen millionaires and paupers recover side by side, had watched powerful men reduced to tears by the simple kindness of a nurse's aid. Pain was the great equalizer, and this man was clearly in pain that went far deeper than his heart condition. "Excuse me?" she said softly, knocking gently on the doorframe. "I'm here to clean your room. Should I come back later?" Marcus turned his head toward her voice, his eyes focusing with visible effort. "No, it's fine. Come in." His voice was hoarse, not from his medical condition, but from what Rosa recognized as the exhaustion of someone who had been crying when he thought no one could hear. As she began her work, Rosa moved with practiced efficiency but unusual gentleness. She had noticed that this patient never slept every time she passed by during her rounds. He was awake, staring at nothing with that same lost expression. The flowers that visitors brought went unnoticed, wilting in their vases. The get well. Cards remained unopened on his bedside table. "You don't sleep much," Rosa observed quietly as she dusted the windowsill. It wasn't really a question. Marcus looked surprised that she had spoken to him beyond the necessary pleasantries. Most of the hospital staff treated him with professional courtesy, tinged with the deference his obvious wealth commanded, but this small woman with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun seemed to see him as simply another human being. "Seemed to turn my mind off," he admitted, then wondered why he was confiding in a stranger. Rosa nodded knowingly as she continued her work. "My husband, may he rest in peace, he was like that too, always thinking about tomorrow, about what needed to be done, about problems that might never happen. He forgot how to be present in today." She moved to empty his wastebasket, noting the untouched meal trays that had been discarded. "The mind is like a radio sometimes," she continued conversationally. "Too many stations playing at once, all that noise. Sometimes you need to find the quiet station." Marcus found himself listening more intently than he had to any boardroom presentation. There was something about Rosa's calm presence that seemed to slow the frantic racing of his thoughts. She worked without urgency, but with complete attention to each task, as if cleaning his room was the most important thing in the world at that moment. "Do you have family?" Rosa asked, as she straightened his blankets with the care of a mother. Tucking in a child, the question hit harder than Marcus expected. "A daughter," he said quietly. "We don't. We haven't spoken in a while." Rosa paused in her work, her dark eyes meeting his with a compassion that held no judgment. "Ah," she said simply, but in that single syllable, Marcus heard understanding, that his expensive therapists had never managed to convey. "She thinks I chose my work over her," he continued, surprising himself again with his candor. "And maybe she's right." "Maybe," Rosa agreed gently, "but maybe that's not the end of the story. Stories can have new chapters, you know." She finished her cleaning and began to push her cart toward the door. "I'll see you tomorrow night, Mr. Whitmore. Try to find that quiet station." As she disappeared into the hallway, Marcus felt something shift inside him, a small crack in the wall he had built around himself. For the first time in days, his breathing seemed easier, not because of the medication, but because someone had seen him not as a CEO or a patient or a failure, but simply as a man who was hurting. Somehow, that recognition had begun to heal something the doctors couldn't reach. Unexpected connection? Benjamin Hayes sat in his small office on the hospital's third floor, reviewing patient files with growing concern. As the head of psychiatric consultation services, he had been called in to evaluate Marcus Whitmore after the man's third sleepless night and his complete refusal to engage with the cardiac rehabilitation program. The nurses reported that he barely ate, declined physical therapy, and had told his business associates to stop visiting entirely. Classic post-cardiac event depression, Ben muttered to himself, making notes in Marcus's chart at 41. Ben had seen this pattern countless times. Successful people. His identity was so wrapped up in their work that a health scare sent them spiraling into existential crises. The treatment protocol was well established: antidepressants, cognitive behavioral therapy, gradual reintegration into normal activities. He knocked softly on Marcus's door and entered to find his patient in the same position he'd been in for days, propped up in bed, staring at the wall with vacant eyes. The morning sun streamed through the windows, but Marcus seemed untouched by its warmth. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Dr. Hayes from psychiatry. Your cardiologist asked me to check in with you." Ben pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, adopting his most approachable demeanor. "How are you feeling today?" Marcus's eyes shifted to him briefly, then back to the wall. "Fine. The nurses tell me you're having trouble sleeping. That's completely normal after what you've been through. There are medications that can help, and we can discuss some coping strategies." Marcus interrupted, his voice flat. "I just need to get out of here and get back to work." Ben recognized the deflection immediately. "What's waiting for you at work that's so urgent?" "Everything." Marcus's jaw tightened. "My company's falling apart. The board is probably planning to replace me as we speak. 20,000 employees depend on the decisions I make, and I'm lying here talking about my feelings." "And how has that pressure been working out for you?" Ben asked gently. The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Ben thought he saw a crack in Marcus's armor. But then the walls went back up. Marcus returned to staring at nothing. Ben spent the next 30 minutes employing every technique in his considerable arsenal: active listening, reframing, gentle confrontation, but Marcus remained unreachable. It was like trying to communicate through bulletproof glass. Frustrated, Ben left the room and nearly collided with a small woman pushing a cleaning cart. He recognized her as one of the night shift custodial staff, though he'd never spoken with her directly. "Dr. Hayes," Rosa said, having overheard his name during shift reports. "The man in 314, he's very sad." Ben paused, intrigued. Hospital custodial staff often had insights that medical professionals missed, simply because they spent more time with patients, and patients often felt less guarded around them. "Have you noticed anything specific?" Rosa set down her spray bottle and considered the question carefully. "He talks to me sometimes, late at night. Not about his heart, about his daughter. Carries a picture of her in his wallet, but he thinks no one sees him looking at it. A little girl with braids, maybe 7 years old." Ben felt a surge of interest. In his session, Marcus had mentioned having a daughter, but had deflected when pressed for details. "What does he say about her? That she doesn't talk to him anymore? That she thinks he chose work over family?" Rosa's expression was thoughtful, but also that he doesn't know how to choose differently. "He's scared, I think. Scared that if he's not the successful man, he's nothing at all." This was exactly the kind of insight Ben had been trying to extract. "How do you get him to open up?" Rosa smiled softly. "I don't try to get him to do anything. I just ... see him. Not the rich man, not the sick man, just the human being who is suffering. Sometimes that's enough." Ben found himself reconsidering his approach entirely. His training emphasized establishing therapeutic rapport and working through cognitive distortions. But perhaps what Marcus needed wasn't therapy in the traditional sense. Perhaps he needed something simpler and more fundamental: to be seen and accepted without condition. "Rosa, isn't it?" Ben asked, and she nodded. "Would you be willing to try something? Nothing that would interfere with your work, but spend a little extra time with Mr. Whitmore when you can. Not as therapy, just as human connection." Rosa looked surprised. "You want the cleaning lady to help with the sad rich man? Want someone who sees him clearly to help him see himself?" "Clearly," Ben corrected. "Sometimes the most profound healing happens outside the formal treatment room." Over the next few days, Ben observed something remarkable. While his official therapy sessions with Marcus continued to yield minimal progress, he began noticing small changes. Marcus started eating more of his meals. He asked for the window blinds to be opened. Most significantly, he began engaging with the nursing staff instead of treating them as invisible functionaries. The breakthrough came when Ben arrived for their session to find Marcus sitting up properly for the first time. actually looking out the window instead of at the wall. Rosa told me something interesting last night, Marcus said without preamble. She said that sometimes we have to lose everything we think we are to discover who we actually are. Ben felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral.
A what?
Do you think she meant by that? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I think she meant that maybe being a failed CEO isn't the worst thing that could happen to me. Maybe being a failed father is. It was the first real emotion Ben had seen from his patient, and he knew they had finally found the thread that could lead. Marcus backed to himself. The gift of understanding, Lena Whitmore sat in her small apartment. In Portland, staring at her phone for the third time that morning. Her father's assistant had called twice, leaving increasingly urgent voicemails about Marcus being in the hospital. Each time, Alina had started to dial the number back, then stopped herself, remembering the last terrible fight they'd had too. Years ago, you care more about your quarterly earnings than your own daughter's wedding. She had screamed at him when he'd missed her engagement party for an emergency board meeting. I'm done being the afterthought in your life, Dad. Don't call me unless you're ready to actually be present. He hadn't called. Once in 24 months. Now, at 25, Alina had built a life deliberately opposite to her father's values. She taught third grade at an inner-city school, lived in a modest apartment, and measured success by the progress of struggling students rather than profit margins. She had convinced herself she was happier without his suffocating ambition and constant absence. But the phone calls about his heart attack had shaken something loose inside her. The drive from Portland to San Francisco took 6 hours, giving Alina plenty of time to rehearse the conversation she wasn't sure she wanted to have. By the time she reached St. Mary's Hospital, her resolve had wavered several times, but something kept pulling her forward, perhaps the memory of the father, who had read her bedtime stories before he became consumed by building his empire. She found his room easily enough and stood in the doorway, studying the man who had once seemed larger than life. Marcus looked smaller somehow, diminished by the hospital gown and the maze of monitoring equipment. His dark hair, which she remembered as always perfectly styled, was disheveled, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of more than just physical exhaustion, Alina? His voice cracked when he saw her, and she watched as disbelief, hope, and fear flickered across his face in rapid succession. "Hi, Dad." She stepped into the room but remained near the door, her arms crossed. Defensively, "Your assistant said you had a heart attack 3 days ago." I'm surprised you came. I'm surprised I came too." Lena moved closer but didn't sit down. "How are you feeling?" "It's better now," Marcus said, and she could see he meant it in ways that had nothing to do with his cardiac condition. "Alina, I know I don't have the right to ask, but you're right," she interrupted. "You don't. But I'm here anyway, so talk." Marcus struggled to find words that could bridge 2 years of silence and a lifetime of emotional distance. Opened his mouth to speak. A gentle knock interrupted them. "Sorry to disturb," Rosa said, poking her head through the doorway. "I can come back later for cleaning." "Oh, please," Marcus said quickly. "Rosa, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Alina." "Alina, this is Rosa. She's been very kind to me." Alina studied the small woman with the warm eyes and gentle demeanor, immediately sensing something special about her. Rosa looked between father and daughter with the perceptive gaze of someone who had seen many family dramas play out in hospital. "Rooms. Your father talks about you often," Rosa said to Alina, her slight accent adding warmth to the words. "He carries your picture everywhere." Alina looked surprised. "He does." Rosa nodded toward Marcus, who reluctantly pulled out his wallet and showed Alina the photograph, her school picture from third grade, worn soft from handling. Alina felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. "You were 7, Marcus said quietly. "It was right before everything started to change, before I lost myself in the company. You drew me a picture that day of our family as superheroes. I was super dad and my power was fixing everything. Do you remember?" Alina looked down at his outstretched hand scarred from years of stress, connected to monitors that beeped steadily with his heartbeat, and slowly placed her own hand in his. "Rose is right," Alina said finally. "You did forget who you were, but I think I forgot to. I forgot that underneath the CEO, there was still the dad who used to make pancakes shaped like animals, and who taught me that being brave meant helping others, not just helping yourself succeed. For the first time in years, father and daughter, began to talk about the gulf between them and whether it might be possible to build a bridge across it. Redemption's price. James Sullivan adjusted his silk tie one final time before entering the hospital elevator. At 55, he carried himself with the polished confidence of a man who had spent 3 decades climbing corporate ladders. But today, his usual composure was strained. As Marcus Whitmore's former business partner and current rival, James had complicated feelings about his old friend's hospitalization. They had started Whitmore Technologies together 20 years ago in James's garage, 2 ambitious young men, with a revolutionary idea for data management software. But as the company grew, so did their differences. Marcus wanted to expand aggressively, to dominate every market they entered. James preferred sustainable growth, ethical practices, and work-life balance. The philosophical divide had eventually led to James selling his shares and starting a competing firm, taking several key employees with him, a betrayal Marcus had never forgiven. Now, clutching a folder of legal documents that could change everything, James felt the weight of their shared history and the complexity of what he was about to propose. He found Marcus sitting in a chair by the window, looking more alert than James had seen him in years. Alina was there too, which surprised him. He'd heard they were estranged. The room felt different somehow, less sterile, as if genuine human connection had transformed the clinical space into something warmer. "James," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't expecting you, Marcus, Alina." James nodded to both, then noticed the small woman quietly arranging fresh flowers in a vase. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met. This is Rosa," Alina said warmly. "Rosa, this is James Sullivan, my father's former business partner." Rosa studied James with the same perceptive gaze she had turned on Marcus weeks earlier. She saw the expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the tension in his shoulders. It's a carefully controlled expression that suggested a man wrestling with difficult decisions. "Please sit," Rosa said simply, gesturing to a chair. "Think this conversation is important? Yes?" James was taken aback by the cleaning lady's quiet authority, but something about her presence made him feel oddly centered. He sat down and opened his folder with hands that weren't quite steady. "Marcus, I know things ended badly between us," James began. "But I've been watching your company's struggles, and I have a proposal." Marcus's expression hardened. "If you're here to gloat about my failures, I'm here to offer you a lifeline," James interrupted. "But it comes with conditions you might not be able to accept." He spread the documents across the bedside table. "I want to merge our companies. Not an acquisition, a true partnership. But this time, we do things differently. Ethical labor practices, reasonable work-life balance for all employees, profit-sharing programs, and a commitment to social responsibility." Marcus stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. "You want to save my company by turning it into everything I've always opposed?" "I want to save your company by turning it into what it should have been from the beginning," James corrected. "What it could have been if we hadn't let ego and fear drive us apart." Lena leaned forward, reading over the documents. "Dad, these terms are incredibly generous. James is basically offering to bail you out and asking for very little in return." "He's asking for everything in return," Marcus said bitterly. "He wants me to admit that his way was right all along." Rosa, who had been quietly listening, stepped closer to the bed. "Mr. Marcus, may I tell you a story?" Both men looked at her in surprise, but she continued without waiting for permission. "In my village in El Salvador, there were 2 farmers who shared a well. One farmer, he wanted to use all the water to grow cash crops, to get rich quick. The other wanted to share the water with the whole village, to grow food for everyone. They fought and fought until finally they built a wall down the middle of the well." Rosa paused, making sure she had their attention. "What happened?" Lena asked softly. "The well dried up," Rosa said simply. "When you divide something that should flow freely, it stops flowing at all." Both men lost everything because they forgot that some things are bigger than individual success. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of Marcus's monitors. James watched his old friend's face, seeing the internal struggle playing out in real time. 20,000 employees, Marcus said finally. If I don't sign this, they lose their jobs. If you don't sign this, they lose their jobs anyway. James replied gently. Your company has maybe 6 months left. But together, we could build something that lasts generations. Marcus looked at Elena, then at Rosa, then back at the documents. You know what the hardest part is? It's not admitting you were right about business practices. It's admitting that I was so afraid of being seen as weak that I became something monstrous instead. Dad, Elena said, taking his hand. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The strongest thing you ever did was reading me bedtime stories when I was scared. The bravest thing was teaching me to ride a bike, even though you were terrified I'd get hurt. Somehow you forgot that real strength comes from protecting people, not profits. Marcus picked up the pen with a shaking hand. As he signed each page, he felt layers of armor he'd worn for decades falling away. It was terrifying and liberating at once. There's one more thing, James said as Marcus finished signing. The new company needs co-CEOs who can model the kind of leadership we're promising. I'd like you to consider staying on, not as the sole decision maker, but as a partner. A real partner this time. Marcus looked around the room, at James, extending an olive branch, at Elena offering forgiveness, at Rosa, whose simple wisdom had helped him find his way back to himself. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. I think, Marcus said slowly, it's time I learned how to build something worth keeping. Outside the window, the city sparkled in the afternoon sun, full of possibility and second chances. The end.